Okay.
Just 1 second. Let me start the recording.
And Prabhakar, I'll mute you.
Okay.
Because
Right.
okay.
Welcome once again to our program. Saturday evening is Conversations, and we are extremely happy that we have been able to get for you today to start a series that Dr. Laukare had suggested, a series on women empowerment. And the first of these is being started off today by one of the most distinguished scientists of the country, Dr. Rohini Godbole. Welcome, Rohini. Welcome to our small group of senior citizens who have been looking forward to your talk, and we really are grateful to you for being able to come and spend some time with us. I would request our member, Geeta, to formally introduce you. Geeta, it's all yours.
Well, I am absolutely delighted. Actually, delighted is even an understatement to have been asked to introduce Dr. Rohini Godbole, a person who needs no introduction, a nationally and internationally renowned physicist who's well known for her vast volume of work in many areas of research in physics. When I sat down this afternoon and to try and write a little summary of all her achievements, I found that itself would take at least half an hour. And I thought, oh, nobody wants to listen to me for half an hour. So I gave it up. And Mr. Raja has circulated a short bio sketch of her work and achievements. I shall not even try. So very briefly, Dr. Rohini Godbole continues to work in her area of expertise as an honorary professor at the Center for High Energy Physics in the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, even after her retirement there. And she is continuing her area of active involvement in very many complex areas of research in physics, nationally and internationally. She is associated, and in my eyes, that seemed like a wonderful, wonderful, amazing association with the work of the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva and to the discovery of the Higgs boson, which has evoked awe and wonder far outside the rarefied world of advanced physics. She has won so many awards from so many prestigious institutions. Again, too numerous to mention in a very short introduction. And despite all this, her continuing active association with the cutting edge of research projects in physics at many levels, it is significant that she finds time she finds time and energy to devote to a totally different area of activity, the advocacy and encouragement of greater involvement of women in science and technology. Dr. Rohini has pioneered a variety of programs to raise awareness of women in science. She has edited a book called Leelavati's Daughters, Women Scientists of India, containing biographical sketches of about 100 women scientists of India, and a book called A Girl's Guide to a Life in Science, containing material to inspire young girls to make for themselves a career in science. Those of us here who have young daughters or granddaughters in school would be well advised to give them a copy of this book. I really think many of us were not exactly encouraged to take up a career in the sciences, even though we have seen time and again that girls are in no way less talented than boys in any field, and in particular in science and technology. Indeed, our guest here is a shining example of this fact. So the following questions were put to Dr. Godbole, in order to give her an outlook of the sort of things we want to know about. Why is diversity in general good in all walks of life, and why particularly in the context of science? What are the special challenges of achieving gender equity in science as compared to gender equity in general? What is the Indian scene like, and what is the way forward? So without taking up any more time, I would like to welcome Dr. Rohini Godbole. Up to you.
Thank you, Geeta. Thank you very much. And I wanted to tell Mr. Raja that I too am now a senior citizen, as was told by Geeta. I am extremely happy to be a part of this conversation. So I will share my screen in half a minute. And I want to sort of warn you that I'm working on a telephone internet connection. So bear with me if in between some things go wrong, because today my broadband is out of order. But I hope that nothing will go wrong seriously. At least so I hope. Okay. So now I share my screen. And let's see, enter full screen. Okay. So can my screen be seen now?
Yes.
Yeah. So good afternoon, everybody. I really feel quite happy to talk to you about women and science, which, as Geeta said, is my second love. The first love, of course, has been particle physics, but this is my second love. And now in my second innings, as it were, since I have now superannuated, maybe I'm hoping to do perhaps even more in this area. So what do I want to do? I will first start with a few comments on need for diversity in general. And then I will try to spend time why women and science needs to be discussed separately. And for that, I have to basically try to expose the challenges of a life in science and challenges of being a woman in man's world. A woman scientist has to usually has to face both these sets of challenges. And then after telling you what the current situation is, sort of trying to define what are the goalposts, I will try to give you information about what have we so far achieved and how do we go forward. I normally, apart from the fact that I have been a scientist who happens to be a woman and who has been working in science for the last 45 years, are there any other credentials why I should be talking about women in science? And since Geeta has already done a wonderful job of telling you most of the things, I can be very brief here. I have a few slides which I will skip. But what I want to tell you here is that my own involvement in the subject of gender and science really started because I was invited in the first international conference on women in physics, which was held by International Union of Pure and Applied Physics, and that was in 2001. And since then, I got involved in general, first with particularly the IUPAP group on women in physics, and then I got involved more and more. We actually managed to get founded a panel for women in science of the Indian Academy of Sciences. We also brought out a report on INSA report on science career for women in India, which was in 2004. I have been a member of the Standing Committee of the Government of India for Women in Science. Actually, what I am really quite happy about is this particular survey that I did, and I will share some experiences from that with you, is the Trend Scientific Woman Power, what fraction are we losing and why? This was a survey I did with some social scientists, in fact. Then I have been kind of a member of all kinds of committees for women in science that have been formed by the government of India. But more importantly, the two books that Geeta mentioned, I was involved in editing and bringing these two books out. And I will tell you a little bit, maybe if I have time, about Lilavati's daughters. And most recently, I have been, in fact, the chair of the thematic working group that looked at India's science and technology and innovation policy from the point of view of equity and inclusion. And gender, of course, formed a very important part. And I would try to share also with you what the group thought as the next steps that need to be taken in our science policy so that women and science gets addressed appropriately. Then there is a link to a TEDx talk that I gave recently on the subject. Somehow that link seems to have disappeared from my slides. I will share it later if anybody is interested. So first I begin with some very general comments. That need of diversity, and in particular, the need of mainstreaming gender across all walks of life. I mean, not just educationally for about, say, last 2 decades, 2.5 decades, the movement has been extremely strong. And then you can naturally ask the question, why the case of women in general, and why the case of women in science in particular, is something that I should want to separate from the general discussions of equity. And the reason to me is really the fact that there is indeed a very big participation, part of the entire humanity, which is 50%, which is involved in all walks of life. And that is kind of different from other unrepresented groups. This group just is a very huge group. Therefore, women in general, the equity in the gender equity seems to be sort of at the top level. And why science needs to be discussed separately, I'll come that in a minute. So first, let's begin with diversity and science. So I'm not going to discuss about diversity in all walks of life. So let me just try to say why diversity in science is important. So diversity, either racial or gender or geographic, these are, among practitioners of science, if you go and, hit on the Google and start finding names of scientists, you would find that the diversity among practicing science is rather small. And the question is it necessarily bad? And of course, the answer is, and this is the thing that needs to be understood, and it's being now discussed more and more, is that it is certainly not, first and foremost, this I already said, that it is certainly not the optimal use of humanity's intellectual potential. And diversity can only be good for science as it is good for any creative activity. I mean, it's not as though that there is a black science or a women's science or a white science, but as many minds come to the game, you are going to get different aspects, and different people have different way of looking at a problem. And therefore, something like science on these very general grounds can certainly benefit from the diversity. And it's not clear that this point could be proven as a scientific fact, but actually work is going on even on those lines. Now, as I said, why discuss women in science separately? And that has to do with the fact that women scientists have perhaps different issues and aspects that they need to focus on than generally all the women who are trying to set their place in other spheres in an equitable way. When I talk science, I don't mean only pure science. I mean science, engineering, mathematics, medicine, the whole lot, technology. So I have already, I said that I can begin with these discussions with different pointers. We already sort of said that, do we know diversity adds to excellence in science? And I'm going to try and give you one positive impact, the way in which diversity changes the scientific issues that get explored. Then, as I said, diversity in science is small is obvious, and people have been asking questions, is it necessarily bad? So I will later on give you numbers which show that the gender diversity is indeed small. So it's not just a shadow boxing. And I will try to also give you next 2-3 slides why increasing the diversity can only be for good of, in some sense, for good of science and society in general. So this whole thing, I can give you a very nice pointer to a discussions that happened due to a comment which was made by the US Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice Roberts in 2015. He actually asked this question in a court. There was some particular case which was being brought out by a university about diversity in education force. And he said, what unique perspective does a minority student bring to a physics class? This was a rhetorical question, not so much to say that a minority student should not be admitted, but while discussing university's argument for affirmative action, he sort of wanted to know that we should analyze what diversity really does in science. And a lot of discussion began from this, and actually one can go and follow a fair amount of studies, social science studies that people are doing. But I want to give just one example, that the issues in science that are chosen for investigation can actually get influenced by the cultural or racial or gender background. And as an example, I want to take, some of you may know her, the first woman Indian doctor to train in the US. Her name was Anandibai Joshi. She trained and she died in 1884. So which means she trained even before that. And she did her thesis on gynecological problems from Hindu women. And part of the reason she did that is because she had lost a child at birth at the age of 14. So what people choose to investigate depends on their personal, gets affected by their backgrounds. Another interesting news item, this is from 2019. There is a research by a lady called Joy Bolwamini. She is an African American and she is a computer scientist. She works at MIT. And she found that the facial recognition programs that are being developed at MIT worked very well only if you were a Caucasian white male. If you were an African American woman, the programs had actually as big a chance as 35% to fail. Why? Because these people who are investigating had used only white Caucasian males to train their artificial intelligence networks on. So this is just to tell you that having diversity of gender, of race in the particular investigations that are being undertaken, diversity is reflected in that, and diversity can make only that set that is being investigated more complete. And of course, it will be silly to say that lack of gender balance has impeded development of excellent science. I mean, nobody can support such an argument. Nobody would make that an argument in their right minds. But the question is something slightly different. And I'm very happy I'm not producing that quote here for you, but a very able American astrophysicist, her name is Vera Rubin. She passed away last year. And she is the one who was actually is responsible for something called the dark matter, discovery of dark matter in the universe, which many of us read in newspaper reports and what have you. And she also said the same thing. So I think I feel very happy that it's not just my personal opinion. The question is, can we point out where the lack of opportunities for women clearly cause science to lose something? That is, not having the gender equity, whether it actually caused some loss, and whether having the gender equity will avoid such losses. I will not again spend my time in giving you examples from history because these can be only anecdotal stories. But nonetheless, the point is that this is the aspect from which side you want to look at what is the need of, say, the gender equity in science. There was actually very recently, again, this was an investigation that originated because of the comment by the Chief Justice Roberts, and as you can see, that was in 2015. This investigation is by William Katz and Sandroni in October 2015, and they actually did a study. This was a behavioral lab, and they looked at different groups, and what they found that the more diverse a group was, more willing the members of the group were to go against the status quo. And this is actually documented scientific result. I have given you the URL here. You can actually go and look at that URL. And what this really proved, that diverse groups are less conformist and more willing to go against the status quo if that leads to better outcomes. Whether a physics graduate goes on to work at a tech company, becomes a scientist, or she ends up being a manager, it will be critical for her success as well as her employer's success, whether she is an original thinker. And whether she is an original thinker seems to get enhanced by working in a more diverse surroundings. And this was actually something that these people proved in a very nice study. And more such studies are actually going on. So this is what I meant by saying that we cannot as yet scientifically prove that diversity is good for science, but I have tried to give you various levels, which are qualitative arguments, which tell us that diversity is certainly good for development of science. And in fact, in India, this takes us slightly even more, why discussion of equity in science, gender equity in science is important. In India, it takes even more a different dimension. Changing economic realities of the last decades or 2 decades have said that the number of women participating in science is going to increase even more. Because let's face it, science doesn't help you make money. A career in science doesn't bring you money. And in the Indian context, fraction of people who go into a pure science career itself actually goes down. And it is historically pretty well known that almost always women move in whenever there is a vacuum, which means that the fraction of women who are participating in processes of science is going to increase even more. And therefore, it is very important to discuss what efforts will make this more efficient and more effective. And actually, I would say that in the context of COVID, even home has become now a workplace. Workplace has moved to home. And in that context, what institutions or society can do, individuals can do to achieve gender equity, it becomes actually even more serious and more important. So what is the story in India? Let's begin with this. Already this was, actually Geeta has done my job very simple because she has already mentioned some very important facts. The fact is that at least in academia, women are not perceived as seeming incapable of intellectual attainment in mathematics or science. Many university prize winners are actually women. We don't seem to have, Larry Summers. I don't know how many of you know of Larry Summers, but he was the president of MIT. And at one point, he made this famous statement that women are not capable of learning science and mathematics, hard sciences and mathematics. So we don't have our Larry Summers in India. That is for sure. But we still don't seem to be inundated by women doing science. Why is that and how is that? So when I give you numbers, I will not, I'm just flashing this to you to tell you that the numbers that I'm going to give you have a solid basis somewhere. These are data collected. And this is the first document that we brought out, which was an examination of Indian women's access to and retention in scientific careers. This was a report we brought out in 2004. This report directly actually led to the formation of the Standing Committee of Women in Science Committee of the government, which is of the Government of India. This also led to the formation of Department of Science and Technology Task Force for Women in Science. And this task force also brought out one report that also has some numbers. In addition to that, for the last 4 years, All India Survey of Higher Education has actually started including gender as one parameter, which is extremely welcome. In fact, for me, this is how it should be. Gender should always be a subtext for any survey and any analysis. I am looking forward to the day when we don't have to bring these kinds of separate documents. I'm looking forward to a day when our general document, which talks about access of India's population to higher education, participation of India's young people in scientific processes, when that has gender as one parameter, That is the day that I look forward, and I actually feel happy that these kinds of reports are already beginning to have gender as one parameter. My numbers will be based on all these reports. And one more, some of the statements I would make will also depend, will also be taken from the data we collected for this survey, which survey report is also available on Indian Academy of Sciences page. So in fact, all the documents that I have flashed here in front of you are available on the Indian Academy of Sciences web page in case anybody would want to look at these numbers in their sort of free time. On top of it, there was a report brought out by Association of Academies and Societies of Sciences in Asia about women in science and technology in Asia. And myself and my colleague, Ramakrishna Ramaswamy, we actually wrote a report on India, women scientists in India. And that also contains a lot of numbers. So the things that I will tell you, which I will, numbers that I will flash later on, will come from all these various sources. But I can first just define it in words. You don't even have to look at numbers. The presence of women students in schools and colleges is very high, and their level of achievement is also very high. It's not that, say in the US typically, or in Germany, wherever I had young girls who are my young colleagues doing physics, they have told me that in the school they were told, why are you taking classes in physics and mathematics in your juniors and so forth. That will not happen in India. But however, participation of women in research in science or in technology is very low, and presence in higher positions in academics is almost negligible. So there are serious leakages in the pipeline from school to college to university. There is not that much leakage. I will show you that in a second. But the real precipitous fall in Indian scene comes after PhD. So this is the very sort of, what I call it as the big fall, that, you look at the participation of fraction of girls in undergraduate education, about 40%. Okay, I mean, the exact numbers are on the next slides. In master, it actually goes up a little bit because boys take up professional courses and women continue doing masters. And in PhD also you will see. So the fraction of girls doing undergraduate in science, doing masters, doing PhD, it's, close to 40%, which is not bad. But when you go to postdoc and young faculty, it goes down to 15%. When you go to professor and senior faculty, you go down to 10%, and I will show you some numbers. And when you go to science leaders, high achievers, it's miserable. I mean, the Indian Institute of Science, till to date, in its 110 years history, or all the IITs, all the ICERs, none of them have even had a woman director ever in their life. So this is the situation in India. Now, the next few slides, I'm not going to spend time on it, but this is just to show you that from 74 to 75 to 2005 and 2006, this you can look at this gray bars, and you can look at this blue bar. The absolute number of women who are getting education in science, university education in science, has increased from 74 to 2005-06. It's even going further. It's increasing exponentially, no problem. Absolute numbers are increasing. Not only that, this is the thing that I already showed you, that this is actually the percentage of women in arts. This is the percentage of women in science. And this is BSc, MSc, and PhD. You can see this. Again, this is something I summarized already, that even at PhD level in science, 30 to 35% women are women. Okay. This is again the more latest data. This was 2001 data. This is more 2018 data. You look at, no matter which course you look at here integrated course, undergraduate course, postgraduate course, MPhil, PhD, the female is this color blue. You see, it's large. So not only that, if you look at the percentage, the distribution in across social categories, that is SC, ST, all categories together, SC, ST, and OBC, you find that Gender distribution is independent of the social category. So education, participation in education by women up to the highest level seems to be pretty equitable. Of course, it is true that in these numbers, which are equitable, if you go to institutes such as IITs, ICERs, IISc, the fraction of women, the undergraduates or graduates, students is much lower than in the general universities. And however, the real fall comes, as I said, very rapidly after PhD. And here is very recent data that has been collected and put by my friends who maintain this web page called Bias Watch India. And you can see, independent of which subject we are talking of. These are actually, they have chosen women faculty fraction in big scientific institutions. So they are really selecting and concentrating here on institutions such as IISc, ICERs, DBT institutes, DST institutes, and you look at different subjects. You more or less see that, okay, in biology, perhaps you have a slightly higher percentage. In mathematics, you have 15%. In physics, you have 11%. So faculty, and this is overall faculty. When you go to faculty at higher level, these fractions go down even further. As I told you, if I look at memberships of academies, fellowships, for example, or Bhatnagar Awards, or Infosys Awards, these fractions keep on going down further and further. That is, women are less and less in number. Of course, by the way, this year has been an exception. As you know, this year, 3 Nobel Prize winners were women in chemistry and physics. And of course, as it happens, in Bhatnagar Awards this year also 3 were women. But let us not get carried away. These are fluctuations rather than, and one would want to look forward to a day when this becomes sort of a common occurrence and not an occurrence to which one has to draw one's attention. So again, I said this already, so I think I can just skip this. So here, these are once again for you, in front of you, the numbers. The serious leakages in pipeline, in college, it's about 40 to 45% of women. In university, about 30 to 35% students are women. PhD is about 25 to 30% of women. And finally, to a full-fledged scientific career, there is only 10%. So in India, the need of the time seems to be able to arrest this precipitous drop after PhD. In Western countries, in fact, the need of the hour is to attract girls to scientific careers. In India, that doesn't seem to be the problem. The problem seems to be how to continue after a scientific education into a scientific career. And actually, with increased spending on science has now been advocated and envisaged, a modulo COVID in India that has been now increased. People have been saying that we should spend more fraction of our GDP on science and so on and so forth. Then one of the issues that always comes up is human resource development. And can we afford this human resource that we have developed not to be used? I mean, this is like saying that what returns do I get on 1 rupee that I invest in training my young people of the country? If in the case of women, out of the 40%, only 10% are going to join in an active scientific career, the returns for your 1 rupee investment in case of women is going to bring you only, that was one third of that. Whereas for a case of men, that is going to give you better yields. So in case of women scientists in India, the problem is not just developing the human resource, but also deployment of that human resource. So, and this makes economic sense that pragmatically, so now I have tried to give you 2 reasons. Very pragmatic reason, which is very economic reason, and a reason about science being a creative activity, which says that why should it be our aim to achieve gender equity in science? And yeah, I had given more examples about how in higher positions in academics, women are less and less. For example, representation in science academies, I mean, just to tell you the truth, I was the first woman in physical sciences, not in other subjects, but in physics, to be elected fellow of the Indian Academy of Sciences in Bangalore. And I think, that's ridiculous because the academies have been in existence for 70 odd years. Fraction in prestigious awards in India of women is only maybe a few percent. So far, there is only, actually now it's 2, because this year one more woman was chosen as a women president. So only 2 presidents of the science academies. We have 3 science academies. They have been existent for 70 years. 70 times 3 is 210, out of which only 2 have been women. I mean, this just goes on. I can give you such numbers. And that situation is something that we need to worry about. So now I hope I have told you the reasons why getting gender equity, achieving gender equity in science is important. I have given you some very pragmatic reasons. I have given you some reasons which are somewhat intangible, but which most of us who do science tend to believe in. And I can give you some more when we are left with time in conversations. I can talk about more proofs. But now I want to sort of take a step back and tell you or point out a few things that are special to women and scientists. So 3 points I want to make. That what is special about a life in science? What are the challenges of being a woman in man's world? And therefore, combining these two, what are special challenges to being a woman scientist? So being science or being a scientist, it means that there is a difference between learning science, teaching science, that's on one side, and doing science on the other hand. That too, if you want to do this science at the cutting edge of research, where the competition is high and top timing is of great essence, science does not wait for anybody. And also, why do I say this, that science does not wait? I'll come in a minute when I tell you about various programs that we have put in place to encourage women scientists. So please remember this point that I'm making, because I'm going to come back to it. Secondly, being a scientist means that you have to be independent. Just doing a PhD is not enough. Just doing a PhD does not mean you're a scientist. You need to create a niche for yourself. Doing your own thing is important, and finding the peace of mind and time to do your own thing is equally important. Because science does not wait, sometimes work is very time critical. And these are the things that we need to remember when we suggest ways and means by which we can enhance women's participation in science. I have already said this to you, that in India, our real challenge is human resource deployment and not along with human resource development. So what are the challenges for an effective deployment of women in science? One, of course, is very obvious and which is known to all of us. And that's an obvious reason that people think that people see and try to suggest remedies for. And that has to do with the fact that there is a ticking body clock. This is different from doing a career in some other, being a professional engineer or being a professional medical doctor and being a professional scientist. There is a difference here. What is the difference? Is that in other professions, once you get a degree, you are all set to start a career. In science, doing a PhD, I told you, is not enough. You have to do an apprenticeship. And this apprenticeship, this 3, 4, 5 years of postdoctoral position is actually the time when you set your own area, when you start asking your own questions, when people realize that you are your own person, you have your own questions to ask, and you have developed the ability to answer those questions. It is these 4 or 5 years which are very crucial for the development and establishment of a scientist in a research career. But unfortunately, it is exactly the time when the body clock is ticking and you have to start a family, you have to have children, and these 2 periods coincide. So this is something which is very, very different for a career in science. That is, the body clock is clicking and the science clock is ticking. And you have to manage how to manage and how to deal with these 2 ticking body clocks is something that is very specific to a career in science. And second, which is very obvious and visible, but this is not specific to science, but this is common to all the professional women. And that is about how do you negotiate the career and family balance. How do you take care of the elderly? How do you take care of your family? How do you cook? How do you buy your vegetables? Even simple things like this. And at the same time, how do you function as a full-fledged, high-profile, high-performing professional? So this is really controlled by social conventions and expectations from the society, family, and actually also the expectations from the women themselves, who actually develop those expectations because of the training. I mean, here I just want to share with you that in my book, Leelavati's Daughters, which I edited, one of my colleagues whom I asked to write about these things, she said, one thing I want to tell people, please don't feel guilty if you have to ask for help to take care of household duties so that you can function equally well on both the fronts. Now, this is what I mean by saying that sometimes we have our own expectations and which are reinforced by training and family and society. So to take care of these kinds of problems, these are obvious problems, and there are actually both DBT and DST. DST, where Prabhakar was secretary official for a long time. So both these organizations have actually set up very good programs in place, and they are enablers. What I call them, these are enablers. And these enablers actually do address some of the challenges that I have just now told you, and some of them mainly career breaks and, giving chance for career advancement, balancing career and life. And these are basically special schemes both by DBT and DST. In DST, the scheme started in 2003, 2004. DBT started maybe 1 year after that. And in this, for example, what you get is all the women who have had to take a break in their career for many reasons, they can apply for a grant, and they get a grant and continue and try to get back to a career in science. And these are enablers. They are good things. But as I said, they try to address this by saying that if you had to take a break, we will provide you opportunities to come back. But if you are an active, very much on the go scientist, you are not interested in taking this break. You want to see how you can, it's like a roadblock, and you want to see how you can get this over, this small roadblock, without having to stop. You maybe slow down your career a bit, but how do you get, the speed breakers? How do you handle the speed breakers? So a person who is because science also does not wait. So this is nice to have a scheme to come back after a break. But for example, if you have developed a particular skill, if you have developed learning how to, specialized in a particular tool, a particular camera, whatever, okay, in research and experiments, and then come back after 4 years, science has gone on. Science has moved onwards. The points you were looking at, which were important at that point, are no longer that important. Something else has become more important. Some other tools are required. And therefore, taking a break to handle your career and family balance and coming back after a break is not the ideal solution. So realizing this itself takes some time. So there was this very nice cartoon which Mahindra had brought out on one of the Women's Day. So I really liked it. So I put it here. He said that achieving the same success to be achieved, same level of success by women actually requires much greater effort. And here he had kind of indicated all these family or issues, household issues that women have to handle, along with the other issues in the career advancement that their men have to take care. But now you have to realize two things. Question you have to ask is this all? And the kind of things that we are suggesting when we say that let's provide household help, let's do this, let's do that, are only taking care of removing this. But is this all? Once we do it, is it going to solve the problem? The general perception is that this is the one and only problem. Once these visible problems are the only problems, once we sort them, all will be left well in the world. And the reality is that it is good that they exist. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. I've already tried to give you reason why this is not sufficient. For example, for a career in science, that coming back after a break, basically it means, to go back to this picture, if you take a break, it means that you start 100 meters behind the line in the race. And then no wonder you are not going to reach a milestone that these guys are going to reach. When there is a Bhatnagar Award being discussed, you have taken a break. You are still 45 years old, but you have not worked for 5 years in your life. Obviously, you're not going to be able to compete for your Bhatnagar Award, which is given only till you are 45. I mean, this is just, awards are not the most important things, but this is just to give an example that being a woman, this is an invisible, so taking a break is actually something where your starting line for women moves backwards. So not only that you have these bigger obstacles, but your starting line goes backwards when it's a career in science. And therefore, so actually this is one problem. And the second problem, and this is more and more serious, that has to be do with invisible and unconscious obstacles. These are about biases about what a woman can do and cannot do. Biases about what a woman should do and should not do. And they can actually impact both the number of women in science and what they can achieve. These can also impact the way the community treats women, the science community, science and technology community treats women. And in my mind, all these invisible and unconscious biases arise from the lack of importance that is attached to a woman's participation in science in the eyes of the society and the scientists. And I want to give you one quote from Soumya Swaminathan, which appeared in the Hindu few days back. So Soumya Swaminathan actually said this, and this is at the level of institutions. I'm going to give you 2 examples, one for the institution and one for the society. So she actually goes on to say that our institutions are very patriarchal. And she is currently the chief scientist of WHO. And I don't know how many of you know, but she's also the DG, Deputy DG, Director General of one of the directorates of WHO for 3 years. And she says that I was lucky perhaps that during my school, college days, or right through education, even when I was doing my MD, I never felt that I was treated differently as a girl or a woman. Exactly what I said, that in education, we don't seem to have an issue. It was only after I started my career in a government research institution that I experienced the culture of a male-dominated committee room. This is when you felt that you were being talked down or made fun of almost all the time. And then you become diffident of expressing your opinion the next time. And she goes on to say she was in her 30s when this was happening to her. And we are talking of Soumya Swaminathan, who actually was only the 2nd DG of ICMR in the Indian history. So this tells you about the unconscious biases and unconscious hurdles that career women face, women in science face. Now, actually, in my Leelavati's daughters, many women wrote different stories. And my friend Shobhana Narasimhan, in fact, actually put together some of those quotes, and I'm using her slides to show them to you. So one of the girls, and this girl happens to be somebody who has won an Infosys award. She has won today a Bhatnagar Award. So, you can imagine. And she said, the principal addressed our class and urged the girls who had opted for science to give up their seats in favor of boys with lower marks. Then she said, my husband didn't want to go away for a long time, but somehow I could convince him. A third one says, I fought a lot to convince my parents about the importance of going ahead for postdoctoral studies. It was not common for a girl to stay on her own in distant places. A fourth one says, I got married, though I was not keen to get married. I had to fulfill my parents' wishes. And these are all successful scientists, by the way. Each one of them have very high achievements to their end. I'm not telling you that. Then she said, the next one says, upon the arrival of my son, I found it very hard to devote myself full time to research. This is the visible and obvious obstacle. Then somebody else said, my husband, a well-known astrophysicist, respected my wish to study mathematics, though he too did not wish me to prioritize career over family. So I think you see that in my Lilavati's daughters, my various Lilavati's daughters have reflected the invisible and the visible biases already. And the invisible biases are even more reflected in these statements in what is called the chilly climate. Not having a loud voice or an aggressive personality is confused with not having confidence in one's work. I often heard my productivity dismissed as she just writes many papers, and by several single author papers seen as evidence of some kind of inability to collaborate. This is, tails I win and heads you lose. I mean, there is no way in this kind of argumentation, there is no way a woman could win. In different colors, I have given you statements by different women. Then she says, but how naturally do colleagues see a woman wanting to do physics as primarily for time pass until succeeding in finding a spouse? And I can tell you, this is where I can relate to this comment, because even in my own career, which started 45 years ago, I had to tell people that, my own career is as a scientist is very important to me. And at this point, it was not lack for having proven credentials. I was a gold medalist from BSc. I was a medalist in IIT in MSc. I did a PhD from an extremely high profile university. I had done a good PhD. After my PhD, I was writing rather good papers. And even then, even I remember, I had to tell people that science, that I have interest in science, which is abiding. Okay. And then I remember somebody saying to me, oh, I didn't realize you were so serious about science. This is exactly what's coming here. Okay. That a woman wanting to do physics, doing it primarily for time pass until succeeding in finding a spouse. Somebody else said, whenever I applied for a job, the 4-year gap to have children came up as a negative point. Then somebody else said, it was almost impossible for me as a woman scientist in a male-dominated field to get nominated. My research was not, interest in research was not taken seriously. Or other one was, a woman is expected to be docile and not ask too many questions. That is the same qualities which you saw in a man as being good, as being aggressive was seen as being good, as being confident. For a woman, that was seen as being something wrong. And I'm giving you these statements. These are not my statements. These are not things that I think are true. Of course, I happen to agree with them. That's why I have reproduced them. But these are the statements that my various daughters of Lilavati's themselves have written down. So this should give you some feeling about invisible bias that I'm talking about. And that means that this kind of invisible bias might be stopping women even before beginning, stopping them to enter the research. Another one is managing dual careers, because very often in your pursuit of science, you meet somebody who is in science and you get married, you spend time with this person. And then the standard thing is we don't hire couples together. Even future Nobel laureates like Rosalind Yalow and Maria Gopalt-Mayer had faced this at the beginning of their career. There is also invisible bias. This is a very interesting study that was done at Yale, and I will just read out the conclusion of this paper, and I can give you the reference. This is something that was published in Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences. I have written the names of the authors here, but read this here. In a randomized double-blind study, total number of cases being 127, science faculty from research-intensive universities rated the application material of a student who was randomly assigned either a male or female name. So you just had 127 applications. You randomly had given them male and female names for a position of a laboratory manager, a very simple position. Faculty participants rated the male applicant as significantly more competent and hireable than the identical female applicant. The difference between two applications was only the gender. So this is the invisible bias. This is at the level of institutions. These invisible biases that I'm telling you are biases at the level of scientific community. These invisible biases that I'm telling you are the invisible biases of the society. Okay. And these are the things that we need to think about how to get rid of them. Okay. And a recognition to women scientists is very often delayed or denied. The ones that are delayed, I can give you very big examples: Rosalind Franklin, Lisa Meitner. But apart from this fact that the obvious injustice, I think this lack of awards and rewards for women also reinforces the perception of the society that science careers are not very important for women and women are not very important for science. So that is also something that we must realize. And the elephant in the room is really harassment. Sexual harassment has legal processes. There are internal complaint committees, but we actually need a lot of maturity. And as a person who has been working in institutions, I can tell you that the institutes also sometimes do not handle this situation well. So institutes need to avoid knee-jerk reactions, and women also need to be mature about it. There is a whole, I can have a whole discussion and we can have a meeting on this subject, so I will not discuss this further. Equally important is what I call gender harassment. And this is gender harassment is more what I call this chilly climate. Okay. That this gender harassment really arises from the lack of importance that is attached to women's participation in the scientific workforce. So this is something we need to think about very clearly. And before I end my discussion, I want to tell you how this invisible bias feeds into a very visible challenge. I told you the visible challenge for women was to come back to a career in science. And there, for example, this study we did about loss of trained scientific woman power, this was to see why the 25% who do PhD at the end of the day don't end up being 25% in the faculty. Why in the faculty we have only 10%. So somehow, even those, all of you who have done PhD, not 100% go into research, into careers, only 1/3 of that seem to go into a career. So why does that happen? And there we found, I can again spend time on this, but I will not show it now, right now. I can share more information with you if you need. The one lesson that we learned is that the invisible biases are also a very important reason for this loss, and not only the family, because we asked the women who had not continued, and we asked them, why do you think you left? Did you only leave because of family loss, family responsibilities? And all of them actually had multiple choices. They could give more answers than more than one answer to the questions. And about 60% of the women who have not continued said that they did not continue because they could not continue. They did not have opportunities. They could not continue because of the lack of cooperative attitude from institutions as well as from the families. So this is something, this is the invisible bias. And we need to actually take many, there are two types of course of actions. One is the societal, and we have to change the mindset, etc. Second is the policy. And here I want to actually end with my comments about policy. I think in India, we have had policies which have been addressed to women, which have been addressed for women to come back to science, which are all very good. But I think time has come now to take the next step. Time has come when we think about the gender equity as an integral part of the policy rather than just special programs. And of course, the changes in mindset and societal conventions have to come. Existing policies for sexual harassments exist. But as I said, we need to, the point is that the existing policies still presuppose that it's a woman's responsibility to balance family and career. So I have been making this point again and again, that we need to have measures, the policies to be gender neutral. And one example is parental leave. Other example is creche. For example, for a long time, institutes would say that they will have a creche only if 35% of the faculty or employees are women. As it turns out, now actually one of the net result of our activities is that now most of the institutions do have a creche. There is a requirement that the institution should have a creche, and you will find it funnily, the creche is used not so much by the female employees, but by the male scientists as well, because they also have working women, the wives. So in fact, these one should look upon creches or parental leaves as gender neutral manner. Instead of saying that there is this 2 year, sometimes the policy is made, sounds very good on paper, that women can take up to 2 years parental leave. But very often, and you and me may not realize this, but I have come across in some corner in North India, in Rajasthan, where women tell me, women who are scientists, tell me that our family tells us, you can take 2 years of leave, why don't you just take it? It is perhaps from the point of view of science, not perfect for that woman right that time to take that leave. So if you make that this parental leave, and this is not supposed to be the leave right after the delivery, this is supposed to be till your child is 18, why not make that parental leave gender neutral? If you say a man or a woman can take this leave, that would make a lot of difference. So important thing is when you set policies, you should involve women as well, because no woman would have sort of missed this point. And right now, this parental leave policy is causing a lot of headache for many women, even if it's supposed to be something which is very good. So, the discussions need to sort of involve, the dialogue need to think about various things. And I think individuals, institutions, and society can do this. Individuals, for example, can realize that child rearing can be done by either parent. You don't need to shame the woman saying that, oh my God, the child is only 6 months and he already started going back to work, but can't you take 2 years leave? Okay, that's what society has to realize. Institutions have to take a proactive role and response to the government policies which are provided for women coming back from a career break. I know even today, even at my own institute, the response is not so positive. Then scientists have to be proactively be aware of negative invisible bias that may be affecting their own decisions. I have seen by observing my own friends, my own colleagues, giving advice to the younger people, I have seen without their knowledge, their advice being biased. So we need to introspect. We need to understand, because these things can only be understood from within. And therefore having dialogues is the most important. But for policies, for example, right now we have policies which are providing avenues for women to come back, but somehow these policies are somehow thought upon as a charity to women. But I think when you think of equity, you should not be thinking it as a charity to them. It should be a matter of fact. You provide a career advancement policy to scientists, make sure there is a clause in that career advancement policy which takes care of the possibility that women might have to take a break for a year. For example, there is something called, DST runs a very nice scheme. It is called Inspire Faculty Fellow. That is something that is required till you get a permanent position, develop your career and develop your own niche. Sometimes you need some more time. So this is a glorified long-term postdoctoral position. Now these positions have an age limit of 35. Now age limit of 35 clearly cuts into some women because they go slow for a year or two. Even if they don't take a break, when they have a child, they definitely go a bit slow. As a result of which, they will not have produced as much as their counterparts by the same age. So if a woman, for example, if she requests, not because she has to be given as a matter of chance, but if a woman feels that she has had a negative point, as a setback because of having children, she can request for the age limit in her case to go from 35 to 36, and that should be allowed. But right now, that is not a part of a career advancement policy. I'm actually very proud to tell you that Indian Institute of Science now has introduced a promotion policy. In general, you can request for a promotion to the next level after 6 years. So here it is said that in our institute now, it's a very nice policy, that every woman doesn't have to take 1 year extra. But if some women, because they have had a child, want to be considered 1 year later, that should be allowed. I think that is the kind of forward-looking thing that institutions have to do. And actually, there is a very nice scheme that exists in UK called the Scientific Women's Academic Network, and that's called Athena Swan. And now we are thinking of producing an Indian version of the same. DST has actually formed a group to implement it, and I really hope that in the Indian context, we will come up with guidelines as to what the institutions can do in this context to increase the, because these institutions really will play, this program involves the institutions in a very integral manner. Universities, research institutes can be ranked in the Athena Swan program. They're actually ranked according to the level of equitable environment that they provide at workplace. And I can imagine that institute and university administration will definitely look at it with great care if your ranking depends on such programs. And each institute can set its own goals for the equity, and the program actually audits how successful they are. So, this program involves institutions, and as I said, they conduct various kinds of courses and various kinds of programs, which actually will address at handling the invisible biases. Okay, this is exactly the issue that this Athena Swan program is actually looking at, and help young professional women to go through the difficult times in the early steps in a career to surmount those speed breakers in a very good manner, is where society, individuals, and institutions can come together. As I said, DST has already started this program, and there is a recommendation from our committee, which we have suggested for the Science and Technology Innovation Policy 2020. We have even suggested one more thing, that each institute should have an equity and inclusion office. And this office is not a watchdog, but this office has to think proactively about programs and processes which will bring equity, not just in the context of gender, but geography, etc. And in efforts to include underrepresented groups and bring equity for, both include the unrepresented groups and bring equity to the groups which are underrepresented. And gender is a big example of a group which is underrepresented. It's not unrepresented, it's underrepresented. And we are proposing that every government department, educational and research institute should have this. And then it can propel the process of gender mainstreaming further. And the fact that this time the discussions of STIP 2020 themselves, I feel, are very, very inclusive, because they have looked at inclusion and equity as one of the important aspects. Since only the wearer knows where the shoe pinches, the remedy of that will be suggested by the unrepresented or the underrepresented groups will be very, very useful and important. It's very important, actually. I want to say it to all. There is still, this policy process is extremely inclusive, and I will request you to look at the announcements that are made in the context of these policies for giving input, because I think input from all walks, people from all walks of life, will make this policy even more, even better. The policy process is still going on, and I would say that please pay attention to it. So what do I learn at the end? That the path to go to a situation when we will just speak of scientists and engineers and not their gender, surprisingly, goes to the path of being very aware of the same for a while. And the quotation is from yours truly in an editorial that I wrote for Current Science. Other way of saying it, I quote a friend of mine. She said that her dream is that one day we will be looked upon as scientists who happen to be women rather than women scientists. See, we don't talk of women poets, women painters. We talk of painters. We talk of poets. Then comes sometime we discuss the two separately. But in case of science, we can never talk of scientists who are women without saying, oh, these are women scientists. So I think that all of us, individuals, society, and the governments have to work towards this aim. And I hope that someday in that haven, this country will arise. So I will flash or put on the screen this one particular word from my friend Ram Ramaswamy, said that a real commitment to gender sensibility is needed and not just a patronizing attitude that facilitates women's career. So my friends, this is all that I want to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Many thanks indeed.
And I'm happy to take questions now.
Okay, we have two questions. I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions, but we have two questions right here, and I'll just read them out. The first one, doesn't which university you did your PhD from also factor in the percentage of doctorates who go into a career in science?
Okay, fair enough. See, what I think I have only given some numbers right now. If you want to know this, what you have to do, the question that you are asking is that I should take a sample of male PhDs also from a given university or from a given setup and ask from that setup, how many males go into a research career? It's clear that not everybody who does a PhD should go into a research career or necessarily wants to go into a research career. I have given you broad brush numbers, but we have done analysis and we have collected data. And what we can tell you at this point, that it's a completely statistically significant manner. When you compare with males and females from the same initial conditions, the fraction of women who end up in a research career is smaller for women than for men. And the difference is almost always, as big as what I have told you. But what I have presented are the average numbers. I mean, I'm happy to hear back from you if you think that this answer doesn't satisfy you. I certainly agree with you that not everybody who does a PhD goes into a science career. Okay, not all the PhDs are equal. I mean, as the famous word of Orwell, some people are more equal than others. So if you do a PhD from Indian Institute of Science, you have a much higher chance of retaining yourself into a scientific career than if you had done a PhD from University of Gorakhpur. No offense meant, but I understand that point. But even if I were to take all the PhDs that come from a prestigious institute like Indian Institute of Science over the last 100 years, and I ask what fraction of the men continue in a career, what fraction of women continue in the career, I can tell you that the differences are still as bad as I have given.
One more, I'll read it out as has been written here. Could you share some advice for what girls could do to negotiate these obstacles, assuming that favorable changes in gender bias may take more time?
Well, fair enough. Again, that's a fair enough question. And that is part of the reason, for example, that we brought out the book Lilavati's Daughters, or the Girl's Guide to Life in Science, because I think it's very important to have role models. It's very important to realize that even if there are gender biases, if you are sure about what you want to do. So what is important is to have the clarity of purpose. That is also lacking sometimes in our own case. And for a girl particularly, she needs to have that clarity of purpose even stronger. And you need to be a bit strong. Pioneers always have to be a bit stronger than the followers. And I imagine that the pioneers in this area, most of the women are still pioneers, but being aware is very important. I would say that people like me, people of my generation, were not even aware. I mean, at a certain point, I can chat with you and I can tell you that when I was young, there were certain ways in which people treated me as a young scientist, which now, when I look back at it, after 35, 40 years, I realize that I think this was done and said because of my gender. So to some extent, you need to be a bit vigilant. You need to be aware of what the situation is. And actually, I think the next generation is much better than us. They are already they're much more intelligent than me. A very dear friend of mine always tells me that she says that when we were doing PhD and trying to get our careers, we were total buddhus. Now the younger generation is much smarter, which I think is true. But obviously these discussions are actually very, very important because you learn from that. And in that sense, I think the girls my two advices would be to have a clarity of purpose, that what you want to do clearly with yourself. And in a career in science, sometimes there are setbacks. Career in science, sometimes there are obstacles. And don't at the first drop say this is also at the same time, don't confuse between the obstacles you are having, because as a scientist might have obstacles in a career. Don't confuse them with the obstacles that you might be having because of your gender. You need to be very mature. You need to be very careful about this. As I said, that is part of it is because most of us are still pioneers in trying to make sure that we make the path easier for the people who will come after us. Looks like there are no further questions.
Thank you very much indeed. Maybe we can take on just one more question.
Sure,
Bharat?
I'm happy.
Yeah. Anyone who would like to ask a question can unmute himself.
I have a comment, Mr. Raja.
Yes, but
Rohini. No, it's just actually all of us in society, particularly males, but all of us in society have a responsibility to ensure diversity of all kinds in all professions, and in this particular case, women in science. And it's incumbent on all of us to recognize where our biases come in, first what they are and where they come in. And I just want to share, one example. This is particularly important because I'm also a teacher. And this is very important, particularly for school teachers, but it's important throughout as well. Boys and men in general are much more dominant in a social setting, much more eager to answer questions, raise their hands. And in fact, males socialize based on hierarchies, not on networks. And so they try to dominate conversations because that's how they establish power and ranking.
agreed.
Girls in particular work by networking on a level of equality. And as a teacher, for instance, we have to recognize that and make sure that we call upon the girls in classroom to interact, to participate in classroom. I do that all the time.
I agree with you, Bharat.
I'm sorry?
Completely agree with you.
Yeah, so I just wanted to share that, and I wanted you to talk about it some more. But these are the sorts of, you can translate this bias. I'm doing it as a professional in a classroom, but we can translate this for example, context of parents raising children and so on and so forth.
Everything. That is when I said society, that it is in so many, that is what I meant by saying that part of our upbringing, okay, don't talk back. The same thing in a boy, you see it as a evidence of spirit. And in a girl's case, you see it as, a bad thing. I can tell you this because I share this with you because I have had a mother who was an extremely strong person, a very intelligent woman. And in her youth, she would have been today 95 if she was still with me. And when she was young, she tells me that because she was a very smart and outspoken young person, people were saying that she's not a good girl because she talks back. That's why I already said that even in a science career, when a man is considered good scientist, when he gets up and asks questions and makes comments. And in women's case, this I can tell you by experience, that even in a conference, when a woman now it's reducing, but when a woman makes a comment, that comment has to be very, very good for people to take it seriously. So you have to, but that is why I said you have to have clarity of purpose and you have to have confidence in yourself. And without that, you cannot go. And there is a responsibility at the other end, people who are educating, to give that, raise that confidence in people. So I completely share your point of view there. And as you can see, there were already indications of that in my presentation.
Right, yeah. But I'm saying, I set that example in my context as an educator, but it's true all aspects of society. Like I said, and it's particularly important for parents to recognize all these societal biases that exist.
I agree with you.
Grandparents.
I mean, if you have a son and a daughter,
yeah.
If you get a visitor, you tell the daughter to bring a glass of water.
Yeah.
If your son keeps that. These are small things.
Yeah, it's a huge thing. It's a huge thing, actually.
This happens. And so this is something, and but I am very hopeful. I'll tell you, I'm very positive. Look, when I talked of Anandibai Joshi, okay, that was 150 years ago. She studied at a time when it was not even considered good for a woman to learn to read and write. Mm-hmm. And compared to that, and for example, my grandmother's generation who studied only till 4th grade. My mother's generation who studied till her marriage only till 1st year of MA, and then a BA, and then did her BA after she got 3 daughters. On the other hand, there is me who went from BSc to MSc to PhD, like I go from 5th grade to 6th grade to 7th grade. So things are improving, and they did not improve unless the underlying improvement came. And particularly when it comes to, and in India, for education, it's much better right now. For education, women's education is understood as being important. Okay, I'll make a snide remark. Part of it is that if your daughter has got a BSc degree or a BE, it's much easier to get her a good match. I'm sorry, but that is still there. But quite apart from that, education, our society doesn't seem to think that it's a bad thing for a woman. But a research career. I mean, I wanted to give an example. I mean, take a woman, mother-in-law, okay? If her daughter-in-law is a medical doctor and in the middle of the night, some gynecologist and somebody calls and says for a difficult delivery, the mother-in-law will be very proud and will say, she's so good. People have to call her in the middle of the night. But if there is a woman who is doing some experiments in the laboratory and she has to go at 2 in the morning to take a reading, it is still not considered kosher. So scientific research, a career in science, is something that a girl should do only after she had taken care of all her responsibilities. And that change in the outlook can come only when we have more and more dialogue, only when we talk about it continuously. That is how I feel about it. And I think nothing like educating ourselves, the society. But the institutions are also to be blamed. Scientific community is also at fault. And we have to do this at different levels. That is the point that I tried to bring across. And as I said, I'm in agreement with you. But here I see somewhat the questions in the chat about fractions. So maybe I should, because Ananya Mukevar is asking a question, as far as I could see, who says that why the percentage of women dropped from college to university. That is still true, Ananya, for the simple thing that very often girls tend to get married after the first degree. So in case the percentage dropping in going from college to university, that is already marriage takes away some. And one is allowing for that. Okay. So in the school, perhaps we still have 40-45%. And by the time you come to college, it goes to 40%, from 45 to 40 roughly. And in the university, it does go down some. But that is, and these are also fluctuations. I mean, if you ever have worked with science numbers in statistics, don't read too much into these numbers at present, because I'll have to give you much more data over many years to see whether this actually persists over years. Okay, so that is my answer to Ananya. Then, why are women losing jobs more than men, even though there are less women in the field? Aditya, I think you understood me wrong. It's not that women are losing jobs. I don't know what you mean by saying that why are women losing jobs more than men. What it is saying is that women are not there in the job. The fraction of women who have full-fledged positions is smaller. So I think your question is a little bit confused, Aditya. Let me see what other question needs to be answered. Yeah, Anvesha has more or less given you a little bit of you are asking particularly in the context of COVID-19 pandemic, Aditya. Okay, I understand. I will tell you why I mentioned COVID pandemic, because I mean, I will share a discussion with you. I have, as you can imagine, I have a fair number of friends in India, outside India. So I happen to know some friends in the US, and 2 or 3 of them, they are of Indian origin, but they are settled in the US. And one of them works as an economist in the university on the West Coast. And she was telling me that as a result of the COVID pandemic, her family, her extended family, her in-laws actually came to live with them. And then her father-in-law couldn't understand, now that she doesn't have to go to work, why can't she cook twice a day?
Wow.
He was understanding it that if she has to go to college and teach there, she cannot spend that much time in the kitchen. But now she doesn't understand that when she is at home, why can't she take care of that first? So COVID-19 has made our homes our workplaces. And the usual solutions that used to be provided. For example, another friend of mine, she is in Geneva, and she said that normally she would put her children in crash. Now the children are in her hair all the time because there are no schools, or the schools are online from home. So at these times, for the family to realize that just because she is at home, she is not free, and one has to share duties. This lesson has to be reinforced even harder in the context of COVID-19. Have I answered your question, Aditya? If I have not, then put again in the this thing. I think I have tried to answer the question, Aditya, because I see your comment, and I think that is going necessary. Sort of, we seem to be on the same page. So that seems to be okay. Okay, Kashvi is making a very interesting statement. So she says that she finds it very hard to believe because she has seen more female science teachers in her school than male science teachers. But Kashvi, I never said that there are not women teachers. I made a very specific statement that in India, we have indeed, what happened to my machine? 1 second. Okay, I will take it down on my solar too. That indeed we have a lot of women in education, science education actually, and I'll tell you the reason for that. That the reason for that is that very often people think, and correctly, that teacher's profession is the best for a woman who has the training, because then her holidays and the kids' holidays and school timings match. So she can take care of her primary duties of taking care of the children as well as taking care of home, and at the same time having a career. So teaching, this is true only in India, by the way. Outside India, you won't even find women science teachers. But this is certainly true in India, that there is a large fraction, and good teachers are science teachers, and they are women. But what I am talking about is professors. What I am talking about is women who do research. What I am talking about is women who define science directions. And such numbers are indeed in India rather small. Okay? So Kashvi, if you still don't understand or agree with me, please tell me. We can discuss further. Okay? So there are differences in different levels, and that's why I spent the time on telling Kashvi you that there is a difference between learning science, teaching science, and doing science. These are 3 different activities, and I was really trying to focus right now in this discussion about women or anybody, any scientist contributing to the development of science and technology directly.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Many thanks. May I request Dr. Lavkare Prabhakar to pose a formal vote of thanks?
Okay, maybe since Kashvi still made a comment, let me just react to her. That Kashvi, there is nothing wrong about teachers learning and doing research to find out new things. But I think my main point is not coming across to you. And if you want, at some point, we can really talk, because it's the young people that I would really like them to understand what I'm saying. So I'm happy to interact with you on email. You can please get my email from the organizers, and I'll be happy to interact with you more on email, because I see that you still have some doubts about my answer.
Okay.
Okay.
Rohini, maybe may I take this opportunity, Rohini, now? Okay. Rohini, first of all, thank you very much for agreeing to my personal request to come. As you know, it's not only Athashri. I'm going to depend on you for a number of projects, which I'm also going to share with Athashrians what they are and where you're going to help us. First of all, I must say that most of the things you have said today must be new to many of our Athashrians, partly because you rightly said there is, and Raja corrected it, somehow there is a male kind of society dominated, and my wife supports that always, saying that yes, there is, when if a boy talks something, it's something important. If the girl talks, it's not so important. Anyway, thank you very much for raising all these issues. And the most important thing is you have set up and started one of our mission, which we are trying to undertake. Namely, we are organizing 3 talks, and this is all for Athashrians and other participants here. We are starting a series where we hope to have what we call as Empowering Women series, in which we are going to have 3 speakers. One is starting with you, and you have set a good start for us, women in science and technology. Second, we want to have women entrepreneurship. We are looking for a good speaker. We are hoping to approach some ladies who are great entrepreneurs. Majumdar Shaw, she's the one who is going to talk. And then we're also going to talk to some ladies who are administrators, particularly in IS. There are a large number of ladies who are in IS. So we hope we are able to get 2 other good speakers as we have got today for women in science. And thank you very much for triggering this whole debate. I also want to tell you that there are many teachers from the school in which I'm attached to, namely the Dean's Academy, who are all perhaps listening to your talk today. Because we circulated it, they were very keen. They are going to start an exhibition for the National Science Day, which they are called Women and Science. And they are going to look at women as scientists and also what science has done for women, which was not your subject today, but that is something which we also want to bring it to the attention of everyone. And you'll be surprised, the girls there have taken initiative. They are the ones who have came to me and say, we want to contribute, we want to initiate. They have got about 100 girls, one girl has started and collected 100 students. And I even asked her, she says there are more boys in the group than in the girl who are interested in organizing this exhibition. So we will come back to you a little bit more on that. And I would like all Athashrians to know this is something very close by to our complex, and I would like them to participate. Secondly, I want you to know that in our own management committee, there are more women than men in the Athashri. So we are really governed, so to say, by a very, very positive women group, and we enjoy this kind of a mixed diversity in our group. This is something which we all honor and respect. And as Raja said, we all try. We are really trying hard to do this. And I just want to conclude with a question which you don't have to answer now, because there already in the chat, I notice about 40 odd questions. We will forward them to you, and maybe you can respond to them when you have time independently. And we have this series which we feel will reach out to many more people. I was surprised to see today, Rohini, that amongst our participants, there are about 100 participants today. is one of the largest contribution we have had. And I'm going to ask Raja and Bharat to do an analysis to find out how many are men and how many are women in this group who are listening to it. And also I'll find out how many dropped out, because now only about 70 are there. We had 100. Right. So I'll find out how many men have dropped out and how many women have dropped out. Anyway, thank you so much, Rohini, for taking time out.
Thank you very much for having me. I have enjoyed this.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the highest number that we've had, 103 at one point.
Yeah, I saw that. Okay. So Rohini, that's what we call as Rohini Godbole. And in Marathi, those of you who don't know Marathi, Godbole means somebody who speaks sweetly. And that's what exactly Rohini did. She was very sweet in all answering questions, raising issues without hurting anyone. So thank you, Rohini, for your sweet talk and an excellent talk.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me and listening to me patiently. All the best. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Many thanks. And I would be happy to have a recording of this talk.
Yes, certainly. We have the recording. We shall send you the link.
And Bharat, your point is really very well taken, and I just want to try to spread the word as much as
sure.
That is all we do. I honestly believe that this is going to be, now with the social media and stuff, these are the kinds of, we have to look at how we can use this to spread this even more. And it is happening, actually. It is happening. I'm a eternal optimist. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks again.
Bharat,
so I'll end the meeting. We're done.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, I'm going to end the meeting at this point.